it starts from a Christian contrarian perspective. In other words, I approach the Bible, and just as I did when I came back to God and Jesus and decided to read it as a contrarian would or as a Berean would. And I want to verify everything. And so I wanted to come at the Bible through an objective lens. And the more I read, the more intrigued I became with it, more interested, and that led me back to God and Jesus. So I look at the Bible not from what other people say it says. I look at it from what it actually says and how that connects throughout the Bible. And before I came back to become a Christian, I had a huge passion for mythology and history. And so when I decided to write the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and of course that's the verse in chapter 6, 1 through 4, where the giants are created, which is the preamble to the flood story, I wanted to, after I wrote sort of the first 10 chapters, I thought, you know what, I want to mix in some of my own knowledge of the consistency of this story that is held throughout the world. And so I started to put in various different legends from the mythology and then connecting that with some of the history and early prehistory that I would have learned from history coming out, and saw, before those connections, but we're able to set it not only alongside what Genesis talks about, but with what other cultures talk about, and saw a consistent story. And so my view in terms of my research of what I do and what I continue to do is I decided to see whether or not I could link the events of prehistory to history and to what is going on today and what's going to happen in the end time. And I thought I was going to write a short book, but it turned out to be hopefully the largest book that I ever wrote. And it's packed with information. So there's no real loose sentences or paragraphs. It's 800 pages. There's over 120 pages of endnotes that show where my research comes from, so people can verify it. And it is, like I say, it's just information after information after information, and just trying to connect the dots, but showing the story of how things have a consistency of coming about before the flood, how that brought about the flood, how those races, peoples, organizations, and religions crossed the flood, then how they took over the same ruling class and organization with their organizational structures and religion as they did before the flood, because the giants usurped the kingship both before and after the flood, very early after the flood. And how that had continued throughout history with what we would know as the feudal system that was made up of all of these offspring of angels and human females that were known as demigods, and noting that demigod in its ancient definition was described as the offspring of a god and a human female that would produce heroes like Hercules or Atlas. Right? And again, you have Poseidon in the Greek, just to make a quick connection. You have Poseidon taking on Clymene. Of course, he had many other human consorts as well, but he created 10 demigod kings over the Atlantean Empire. And Atlas was his firstborn and the king of the capital. So Poseidon is doing the same thing as described by the sons of God, which are angels in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, who go to human females and create the giants, as the King James Version calls it, and other English translations will say Nephilim, which is the Hebrew word Nephil, from the root word fall, for the fallen ones who created them, and the I am is the male plural, and it's how you come up with that word Nephilim, if people have heard that one out there, and I'm sure they have, as it's more of a common term being used today. And it's the same type of being that was created again after the flood with the Rephaim. And so these are the post-diluvian giants. And so that's the research that I'm doing. And I wanted to connect in the book and in my research, which I continually like to do, because I look at this as the Nephilim world order, both before and after the flood. And the NWO is probably the same Nephilim order that's going to be coming about. We just don't understand it in those terms as the descendants of those Nephilim and Rephaim, who are the royal class that imposed a feudal society of their relatives, of all of the nobility and the elite and the rich and all of the educated, controlling religion, government, and the army throughout history. And now they're going to try and recreate that new Atlantean empire in the end time with those 10 kings and create an age where they can consort with the gods again, just as they did before the flood. So again, I know that was a lot of information, but what the book does is connect all of those dots through sort of a 6,000 year connect the dots investigation into what I call the House of Dragons.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I don't own your book yet, but that's something that I want to dive in both feet and examine those different data points and the connecting points, because that's how my brain works as well. Is like, oh, there's this piece of information over here. There's this too, and that kind of sounds a lot like this. So let's talk about it. I do want to kind of start. So in history, let's take it kind of back to the beginning. And you kind of, you start obviously with Adam and Eve in a garden, and it devolves from there into their offspring and offspring making decisions. And there's kind of a split that happens there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I think most people are familiar with the Adam and Eve story. And so they are deceived by an interesting individual, which is an Akash, which is the serpent. And I'll cover that as that being Satan, and I don't think it is. I think Satan is coaching or avataring the Akash. But an Akash is a beast of the field, and it's a walking, talking, intelligent being that is a serpentine being that is going to deceive Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so the serpent does deceive Eve, and that ostracizes Adam and Eve. And they now know the knowledge of good and evil, plus the knowledge that God taught Adam while in Eden, which would be substantial if you think about it, because he's running a massive agrarian society between 4 rivers that include like the Tigris and the Euphrates and 2 other ones. So it's a huge area growing crops, growing orchards. And we know there's orchards because there's the fruit of the trees that they're eating, and they're also raising animals. And we're told all about this in Genesis 2. So he learns a lot, and he would need to know a lot to be able to do that. And then this knowledge is going to be passed down through the generations, which is going to be a significant part on how the different genealogies split. So Cain, after killing Abel, is ostracized, and he goes east to the land of Nod, which is in Sumer or Shinar, as we would understand it biblically. And Shinar is a transliteration for Sumer, between the 2 rivers in Chaldea or Chaldea, however you want to pronounce that. And he takes a wife there, which is an interesting story. We're not going to jump into that right now, but he starts a bloodline. And you get that genealogy in Genesis 3, or in Genesis 4, I'm sorry. And you get that genealogy that has patriarchs right down to Lamech, who produces Jubal, Jubal, Nama, and Tubal-Cain. And the names in that lineage are very much similar to the 10 that are shown in the Sethian line. And Seth is born when Adam is 130 years and sometime after Cain leaves. And so you get these 2 bloodlines. And polytheism and secret societies will connect their history and their beginnings back to the Cainite line. And so Enoch, son of Cain, and people should very much understand that there are now 2 Enochs, one that's the son of Jared in the Seth line, and Enoch, son of Cain, is going to develop this knowledge, put it into the 7 sacred sciences, develop the sun-worshipping bull cult of the antediluvian epoch that crosses the flood at Nimrod, with Nimrod at Babel, but that's jumping ahead. And he's also going to create mystery schools to develop the 7 sacred sciences that he has developed this knowledge that was given to him from Cain, from Adam. And this is the knowledge that's going to blend with the illicit knowledge of the gods and or the fallen angels from a Christian perspective, that's going to accelerate the world and its technology to be able to create a lot of these maybe